Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Foxpunter Manager Profiling. This is the podcast in which we put the managerial petri dish under the microscope and dig deep into the psychology of some of the game's most notable figures. Once again, we'll be using the Myers-Briggs model to explore the personality types of two more managers, and over the next 45 minutes, we'll also be exploring their decision-making process and looking a little closer at how they deal with the rollercoaster of emotions that comes with managing a professional football club. If you like what you hear, please do like and subscribe to our podcast. And you can also go back and listen to any of our 11 previous episodes, which can be found on our feed and also, of course, on Spotify as well by searching for Foxpunter Manager Profiling. We've paired up such luminaries as Sam Allardyce and Darryl Clark, Pep Guardiola and Mark Cooper and Neil Harris and Nigel Clough as well. So lots to go at. If you've got time this week, please do go back and have a listen. My name is Jack Critchley, although I am simply the warm-up man for the headline act, who, as always, is Foxpunter's Mike Holden. Mike, good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, Jack. How's it going? You okay?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Nice quiet week on the managerial front. I was scratching my head this week thinking, have I missed something? Still a few vacancies knocking around the EFL, but no, I haven't really. Not too many incomings or outgoings. The one that kind of stands out is a bit of a continuation, really. Wayne Rooney is the permanent Derby manager, Mike, and we don't have a lot to go on yet. He's only been in the role for a few short weeks, but he's certainly made an impact. But the real test comes now.
Yeah, it was a reasonably impressive interim sort of caretaker spell. Once he became the sole man. I think the problem at first with Derby was that when Koku went, they had three guys in charge. Nobody was really, ultimately responsible and calling the shots. Then Rooney decided to take it on solely himself. And from that point, a couple of really tough 6-pointers against Coventry and Wickham, relegation battles, a bit of thankless tasks, really, because those clubs were in decent shape at the time when they turned up at Pride Park. Managed to sort of scrape through those with 1-1 draws and then started grinding out clean sheets and making themselves really difficult to beat. So then, a couple of draws and a couple of wins later, and it all looks completely different. And I must admit, he surprised me a little bit, Rooney, because, you listen to him speak in interviews, and I think back to my first impressions of Lee Bowyer, of what I was expecting from Lee Bowyer, and I wasn't expecting an awful lot, You talk about talented players and just think that they take their talent for granted and they can just stroll in, and I wasn't necessarily expecting a lot. Now, I wouldn't go as far to say he's been massively articulate in his interviews. He's still the same Rooney that you listen to in post-match. But nonetheless, he's been just little threads and little cues of, that he does know what he's doing. His observation skills, he knows exactly what to zone in on as the primary problem that needs solving in any situation, I think. But I think the real test comes now. He's no longer interim. It's not a probation period where the players are playing to try and earn in the job. He's in the job now, and you're in a relegation battle. So I guess this is the point forward where he really gets judged.
Yeah, Derby's problem all season has not necessarily been defending, although he has helped them tighten up, but it's been finding the back of the net, and that is a real challenge for Wayne Rooney, isn't it, to get his side firing. I don't suspect they will go down or will be in any danger come the last few weeks, but he's really got to find a solution in the final third now. I imagine, given what he did during his playing career, he knows a thing or two about knocking them in the back of the net, Mike. But how hard is it to kind of sort that out on the pitch when you're not able to be there yourself?
Yeah, well, it will be interesting to see, because without himself as well, having hung up his boots as a player now, I mean, he was a big source of creativity, even from a sort of a deep quarterback type role that he was cast as last season under Koku. His long diagonals were a big outball for Derby and kind of got them, at opposition on the transition. So they're going to have to kind of reinvent themselves in some way, because they're going to, like you say, they are going to need goals, because you can't clean sheet your way to survival necessarily. You've got to come up with something at the other end of the pitch. It's going to be interesting to see, but I think there will have to be some sort of reinvention there tactically.
Yeah, so it's difficult to clean sheet your way to survival, especially when, like on Saturday, they got undone very, very late on by an 89th minute goal, Rotherham winning by a 0-0. And problems for Wayne Rooney, but he'll be looking to solve them and working on them over the coming days on the training ground. Rotherham, who beat them, are managed by Paul Warne, a man who is been in that role for quite some time, and he is going to be the main focus of our podcast this week. We're sticking in the Championship fully today as well. We covered Rooney. Later on, we'll talk about Birmingham's Aitor Karanka, who got a big win against his former club on Saturday lunchtime. But yeah, Paul Warne here, Mike. I find him a fascinating character. He's the sort of man who I imagine if I was a player, I'd need an arm around the shoulder, probably constantly. And I imagine that Paul Warne would be the man to provide me with that. First of all, before we explore his personality type, could he be too nice?
Well, this is the thing with Warne. He is very authentic and very easy to get on with, and he's very big on connection. And he's built probably 2 teams from scratch now at Rotherham, and there's been a real connection between players. I think that's a hallmark of his teams. Is what goes on behind the scenes is real genuine affection between players. And, you know, he talked when they were relegated 2 years ago about as though, you know, the players had been on a journey together and they weren't going to be together much longer. And that was kind of his sales pitch for survival. You know, make sure, try and finish this story on a high, because you players might not get to play together again, you know, and you want to have something to remember these connections by, because you've built some friendships, you know, that could be lasting friendships. So that's very much about what he's all about behind the scenes. But yes, too nice, possibly, in terms of his mentality and certainly his attitude towards the Championship. I think sometimes he can be a little bit too respectful of the level. You know, relegated twice from the Championship now, but promoted twice back from League One. You know, you don't get 2 promotions from League One at 2 attempts unless you know what you're doing. And you know, he's clearly had some success in that regard. But I'm not entirely sure whether he actually believes he belongs at Championship level even now yet, you know, at this stage.
So that obviously, if he is too nice, he can't necessarily change that. That's something that is ingrained. But what I guess you're saying is he can do is change his mentality, and that then should kind of infiltrate its way to the players. So, you know, tell them that they belong in the Championship, prove that you are at this level. Because Gareth Ainsworth, who is manager of Wycombe, are a team who, let's face it, no one expected them to be at this level this season. He comes out, all guns blazing, even on the back of a 7-match losing streak, and says, you know, we're going to win sooner or later. You know, we're going to stay up. We're going to get enough points. We've got the players to do it. We've got the heart to do it. Whereas you don't really get that from Warne, do you? You kind of get him saying, well, yeah, draw, pleased with that, another point on the board. He kind of almost accepts what he's got, whereas Gareth Ainsworth seems to always be punching upwards.
Yeah, I think with Warne, it's, you know, you mentioned the draws there, and 2 seasons ago when they were relegated, I think it was 16 draws they finished the season with, and there was numerous occasions within the season that they had potential, like real 6-pointers. I recall one game in particular. They went away to Millwall. It was probably around January time in the season. And if you're targeting certain games, I was looking, you know, you profile teams for betting, and I'm profiling and thinking, what a great time to go to Millwall. You know, they could be stretched. They've had injuries. They've had, you know, all these little issues that add up, that mount up, and you think this is a big opportunity for Rotherham to go and win and nick this. If they can keep a clean sheet, they can go and nick it. And I think they played at a 0-0 draw and were really happy with the result afterwards. And you're thinking, there was a missed opportunity, you know, and you've not necessarily seen it. But Warne's got this mentality that's like, he's like almost 2 different managers between the League One and the Championship. And the limiting beliefs comes out in his language. He talks about points being like gold dust at Championship level. And, you know, you get a point away from home and it's like a little gold nugget, he always says. You know, and it's like, it kind of creates this scarcity value, as if, you know, again, not belonging, that Rotherham don't necessarily belong at this level. So a single point away from home against the team in the bottom 6 among us is something to treasure. It's a real big thing. And, you know, he says a lot of this stuff half joking, but I think it kind of feeds into the whole psyche of where Rotherham see themselves, you know, in some of these encounters. So that's why this win away at Derby is really interesting this weekend. You know, it came late, and I think sometimes it was good. I've heard Warne say this before, again, jokingly. It's a good job we scored late because we didn't have too long to hold on. You know, and I think back to, I backed them a few weeks ago at Blackburn. I thought Blackburn away was a good opportunity for them to, as an underdog, go away and land a big price away from home. And I think they went 1-0 up in the game and they were the better team for an hour or so. And then they just kind of sat back on it, invited the pressure, and ended up losing the game 2-1. And, it was almost like they had too long in the game. And rather than going for it late on to win the game 2-1, they were kind of sitting back and waiting for what possibly seemed like the inevitable. And yeah, it's just, this is it. It's an ongoing theme that in clutch moments, you have to be careful the way you frame things in the media, because in clutch moments, what's at the back of your mind can often be these throwaway comments. And what is interesting this season, though, is that Warne appears to have picked up himself on the fact that his players in certain matches have paid the opposition too much respect. Not necessarily making the connection, with the previous team or the things that he says, in and around matches, but he has raised the concern that his players need to feel like they belong at the level because they've come out in the first half of certain games and they've had to go behind in order to get themselves going, like they've paid the opposition too much respect. I think QPR away was one such game, not the only one. There's been 3 or 4 times he's mentioned it. So I think he's kind of coming round to this idea that, we need to start really believing that we belong at this level. But I think he's got to be careful still about his own language in the meantime and the way that he frames things. Because you make the comparison with Gareth Ainsworth, and like you say, Ainsworth is so bullish. He's so, he's determined. There's no question in his mind that we don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to survive. We've got, and it's that underdog spirit. There's 2 ways an underdog spirit can go. It can be proving the world wrong, or it can be, well, we'll give it a good shot, but, we are the underdogs. And, if it's not meant to be, then it's not meant to be. The 2 different routes you can take when you see yourself as an underdog. And, Warne should probably look towards Ainsworth and the way that Ainsworth frames things a little bit more in the way, and be careful with his language sometimes.
What is this born out of then, or what could it be born out of? So I kind of have 2 questions here. Is this because maybe Paul Warne didn't ever see himself as a football manager and a manager at this level, certainly, and so he's still maybe in a slight, I guess a mindset of disbelief that he's here? Or could it be something to do with the fact that Rotherham don't have big wads of cash to throw around, so he's not able to recruit the type of players that he would see as championship quality, or those sort of players that would fit in at the top of the championship table? Or could it be a combination of both? Or, Mike, is it something completely different that I've not thought of?
Yeah, no, I think it is a combination of both. I think the first thing we have to say is that, let's make no bones about it. Rotherham do belong in the bottom 6 for sure, probably bottom 3 of the championship in terms of budget. That's the level that they're at. But everybody knows that in advance. Many clubs in all divisions have to just get on with it and come up with ways and means to confound that. So, yeah, there's no 2 ways about that. He is shopping in a completely different market to most clubs. But also as well, yeah, I mean, what you say, every manager's strength is his weakness, as I've said in previous episodes. And in Warne's case, it's basically, he is very vulnerable as a manager and very authentic. He's one of the most genuine people. You listen to people within the game, opposition managers especially, and, you can't escape the impression that Warne is one of the most genuine people you'll meet in football. That's a strength. Anything can be strength in leadership, and behind the scenes, that's a real strength, that ability to be vulnerable and to be genuinely authentic. And for your players to understand that whenever you say something, it's always coming from the heart. You wear your heart on your sleeve, and you're not just sort of bullshitting, basically, just trying to conjure up something to say the right thing at the right time, just say anything, whatever gets the job done. No, he's genuinely coming from a place of authenticity. But within that, always wanting to be in touch with that authentic side of himself. I remember the very, very first interview he ever gave as a manager for the Football League paper, made real waves because of how authentic he was in the interview, about talking about his son, sort of scouting for him and talking about other teams in the division and bringing in papers and saying, the scouting reports of future opposition. And then saying, like, you know, he doesn't realise that, you know, his dad feels like a bit of a fraud, you know, that I'm not at the level that he thinks I am. I'm his dad and I'm his hero, but I feel like a fraud. Like, I fell into this job. But, you know, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever for Warne to be thinking anything like that now after 2 promotions. You know, look at all the managers in League One that have not achieved promotion in the 3 years that he's done it twice. You know, so there's absolutely, there should be no doubt on his part. But I think sometimes this level of authenticity and vulnerability can still come through in a way that is not helpful. And I think it's one of those where there possibly needs to be a little bit more of a shield that what the Paul Warne we see behind the scenes and what comes out to the media and kind of represents Rotherham in the context of the division. You know, the vulnerability stops at the dressing room door and then he goes out to the media, and, you know, there's a clear message that can be helpful for the psyche of the team going forward.
Yeah, because he's often talking about his son in post-match interviews. He's also, here in Leeds, we get the Yorkshire news, obviously, and he's always on there doing something in the community with his Rotherham players. So he clearly absolutely throws himself into everything that he possibly can, and the players clearly enjoy being around him. There's certainly positivity in that dressing room. They never know when they're beaten either. You know, even when they go 1-0 down, they often at least give it a good go, particularly, as you say, late in games. So with that in mind, what sort of players do you believe work best with Paul Warne? Do you think you have to kind of be a bit of a grafter and maybe someone who's worked their way to this point, or do you think, I mean, let's say, for example, he's given a big budget one season and he's able to pick the cream of the crop when it comes to Championship players. Do you think that Warne's the sort of manager who has to be really careful with the type of player he connects with?
Yeah, I do think that he would potentially struggle with big egos. You know, we're saying about a manager who makes himself vulnerable in terms of his own status within, you know, managerial circles. Well, he suddenly gets, you know, you imagine someone like a Troy Deeney in his dressing room. And but I think there's, you know, recruitment is something I think he spends a lot of time on, because, you know, he has built 2 teams from scratch that have got out of League One and given a good account of themselves in the Championship. You know, certainly been, you know, made the presence felt within games if results haven't necessarily measured up to the same standards. And, you know, I think that same level of authenticity, I think he looks into the personality and character of a player, you know, to see, you know, I think he recognises what he sees in himself, the same level of sort of genuineness within a player, that I can tap into something here that, you know, this player just needs someone to believe in him and, you know, needs to feel part of something bigger and, you know, to have the camaraderie behind the scenes and, you know, that side of the game. So I think that's very much in his recruitment. You know, we can make the link with Gareth Ainsworth. It's the same decision-making process, just at different levels of it. And with Ainsworth, the recruitment's a big thing. With Ainsworth, he looks for the backstory of a player to tap into something that basically, you know, is wanting to prove the world wrong, that they've had some kind of hardship just not so long ago in the career that they really want to avenge. That can be a big thread for Ainsworth to try to tap into. With Warne, I think it's just genuinely, here's a nice guy who will make us a happy group and we'll all be, you know, together in this, and we're going to have a real good time behind the scenes day to day. We're going to work hard. You know, there's no doubt that his teams work hard, certainly physically, with his, you know, his background as a fitness coach and his understanding of sports science and all of that side of things. You know, they outrun most teams, but whereas in League One they ran over the top of teams, obviously it's not so straightforward in the Championship. And, you know, so his recruitment is something that he thinks long and hard about, for sure, I think. I'm not sure. I think sometimes it can almost be not easy, but it's quite straightforward for him. He hasn't got the budget. So the qualities he's looking for are not necessarily at a premium in the transfer market anyway. So there's kind of a nice synergy between what he can do and what he wants to do anyway. So, you know, it is genuinely about looking for personalities and fitness and athleticism and just creating this culture and camaraderie behind the scenes. So I don't necessarily think to that extreme, the budget and that side of things is necessarily a problem. It's just, you know, he's got this blueprint that he's worked to. that, like we say, serves Rotherham so well in League One, but that making that step up to the Championship, I just think sometimes it's maybe something a little bit more psychological, and bottom line comes down to belief.
We've spent a lot of time contrasting him to Gareth Ainsworth, Mike, so far. In terms of managers that he is similar to, is there anybody? I must admit, I'm having to think about managers past and present in the Football League, and to me, when I hear Warne speak, when he first came out as well, and we first saw him as Rotherham manager, he just felt very different to anyone we've seen before. But is there any one personality type that is similar?
I also can make comparisons with Carl Robinson. Carl Robinson, a manager that has had one promotion from League One into the Championship. Yet you listen to Carl Robinson speak, and he's a lot more sure of himself. In the way he presents himself, the way that he comes across in his post-match interviews can be very much wears his heart on his sleeve. And I think the pair of them are both very original thinkers. Warne is a very original thinker in what he does, and you hear some of his motivational techniques down the years that he has used in certain matches have been absolutely inspired. I think back to one in particular, away at Ipswich last season in League One. And they went away to Ipswich. Ipswich, top of the table at the time, really going well. And Warne basically turned around to his dressing room. Whiteboard was out in the dressing room just before kickoff. And he handed the players one by one the pen and said, I want you to write on the board somebody who you want to win this game for. And, the players took turns, and they all sort of got into the role, and they thought of someone they loved or someone dear to them, or a reason why this game meant so much to them. Then Warne went last. He picked up the pen, he went to the whiteboard, and he wrote his dad's name, and then explained to the dressing room how his dad was a Norwich fan and what it would have meant to his dad. And his dad had just passed away that year. I mean, you talk about authenticity and vulnerability and all of those kinds of things. I mean, how can you not go out after that team talk and not then go and win it? And it's not like Paul Warne's a manager that asks it's about him or asks anything to go and do it for me. But that was just one occasion where he kind of made the point, a brilliant way to make the point of saying, my dad's a Norwich fan, he really would have loved for me to win this game. Can you go out and win it? The way he built the team talk up for that moment just before they left the dressing room, incredible, really brilliant piece of motivation.
Yeah, fantastic, and really connecting with his players on a human level as well. Before we move on to Aitor Karanka, Mike, is there anything else you'd like to add about Paul Warne? Anything else that we know from his personality? And also, I think we should ask as well, the victory against Derby, a turning point. You're seeing a change in certainly his attitude post-match and maybe even his body language. Are Rotherham going to kick on from here?
I hope so. I think the main point I want to make is that, this season is not 2 seasons ago. And I think Warne, a lot of what I've said in this section is related to what happened 2 seasons ago. There's been threads of it still this season, but there is a quiet shift taking place, but I don't feel like it's a big enough shift yet. I'd love this to be the catalyst for something for Rotherham, and that Rotherham, because you look at Rotherham in League One and they routinely go away from home and win games 2-1, 3-1 in a kind of really bullish nature. And there's just too many 1-0, 2-0 defeats and things where they only get going after they've gone behind at this level. And, I'd love it to be a turn. I'd just love to see the full shift of what they could be, if if you go down all guns blazing, telling everyone you're going to stay up and then you don't, and so what? But, you've kind of really, you've really nailed your colours to the mast of what you're all about. And, you're not doing things in half measures psychologically and trying to play down your chances, play them up a bit like Gareth Ainsworth does. That's what I'd love to see in the second half of the season.
Aitor Karanka coming up then very shortly, but before we do, let's just mention Foxpunter and in particular, Mike, the Facebook page, which has been a hive of activity over the past few weeks. And of course, if you want to watch any of the podcasts, and also if you want to check out any of the individual clips as well, you can go to our YouTube page too. We're on Twitter also, where there'll be the odd manager comment and retweet as well of really interesting articles about gaffers from up and down the EFL. But yeah, Facebook is the place to be at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I'm working on it. Still, I mentioned last week the discipline course and mindset, and I'm really sort of studying this survey that I've done previously and working with these ideas to see how I can coach strategies and come up with strategies to share. So there's going to be clips and bits and pieces on Facebook as I'm going through that process, just sharing little bits here and there, building up towards, a webinar and materials that will follow from it.
Absolutely. Just search for Foxpunter on Facebook. It's at Foxpunter on Twitter. And again, just search for us on YouTube as well. Right, time to focus on Birmingham. So we're staying in the Championship and we're looking at another side who won 1-0 this weekend. Perhaps a surprising victory, although having said that, the Blues have been better away from home, far better away from home than they have been at St Andrews over the past couple of seasons. They've also been pretty poor data-wise as well recently. So a big price winner yesterday against his former club for Aitor Karanka. Now, he's a man who enjoyed a lot of success at Middlesbrough, Mike. So this was the perfect way to end a barren run and maybe just relieve a bit of that pressure, because the fans were getting a little bit tetchy, weren't they?
Yeah, and I think they had every reason to, because like you say, the data has been terrible. XG ratio wise, worst team in the division, going back over 8 matches, 12 matches, really worrying signs. And you think of how, the way that the Birmingham owners have been in recent years. We're in the middle of a January transfer window. If they were going to make a change, if they were aware of that the underlying data and where this all might be heading, some crucial games were coming up for the remainder of this month, because you'd think they could pull the trigger quickly and then throw some money at it. They're not afraid to throw money, and they've kind of had a reset with the Jude Bellingham money from, the FFP concerns they've had and stuff like that. They suddenly find themselves in a position where they had a reset in the summer and decided to ditch Pep Clotet, bring in Karanka and give him the resources that previous managers hadn't had. So, yeah, it was becoming a really worrying time for him. But then all of a sudden, just in the nick of time, that there's an Aitor Karanka performance with the blueprint, the stamp all over it of what his teams are all about when they function in, the way that his teams used to at Middlesbrough.
Yeah, 1-0 away win is the perfect Aitor Karanka performance. So from what you're saying there, Mike, it seems like every single player needs to buy in to what Aitor wants in order to enjoy success. And clearly, you could just tell by the way they were playing, by the smiles on the faces, that everybody was absolutely 100% behind him at Middlesbrough. But at Forest and then now at Birmingham, you get the feeling that it's maybe not going that way.
Yeah, I think this potentially comes down to communication, and that it just feels like the message is not getting across, because we know what a Karanka team looks like, and we know it's defensive. We know it's, or should we say, playing with the handbrake on to begin with. The expression comes later, well, once players are comfortable within a system. But when the basics are not being done right, then you begin to wonder if it's a communication issue. And I do wonder a little bit. I've heard things said about people that have had conversations with Aitor Karanka that, I think we're talking about a really kind of, thoughtful and intelligent guy, very deep theoretical ideas he's got about the game. And I think sometimes maybe that the language barrier can be a bit of an issue for him. He doesn't come across as the most charismatic guy. You listen to his interviews and you don't necessarily think, you're listening to the next Pep Guardiola or anything like that. And I think sometimes his English is fine in terms of the basics, but there's levels of being able to articulate yourself in a different language. I know this only too well living in Spain. And sometimes I think when you have to react very, very quickly and say the right thing at just the right time, I just think, and the deeper you go into a more sophisticated way of playing than most managers possibly, try to impose on a team, I think there's possibility there that Karanka struggles to get messages across quickly. It did take him 2 years to really get his blueprint bedded down at Middlesbrough. In the second season, they looked, towards the end of the first season, they started to look really formidable. In the second season, worthy automatic promotion. And yeah, I just, you wonder whether he gets that sort of time at Birmingham.
So a lot of fans this season, Mike, saying that they weren't really sure what the best formation was. They were a bit sick and tired of players coming in for one game and then going out again, a lot of chopping and changing. And I was looking at the formations that Aitor Karanka has used this season, and there's an awful lot of different ones. So there's a 4-4-2, there's a 3-5-2 flat, there's a 3-5-2, a 5-3-2, a 3-4-3 on one occasion. But most of the time, he has gone with the 4-2-3-1, and that is what got the victory on Saturday. I've always seen Aitor Karanka as a man who absolutely rigidly sticks to one system, whether it's working immediately or whether it'll take time. That's where we're going. That's what we're doing. No questions asked. But is that evidence of a little bit of doubt creeping in, do you think, his constant tweaking?
I would say so, yeah. I think he is a manager that does need to stick to one system and then constantly refine that system and tweak it and fine-tune it until it's absolutely purring. I think chopping and changing between systems is possibly a sign of stress for him. You know, that's coming from a place of, you know, he's short of ideas himself and not knowing where to turn next because he doesn't necessarily trust the system that he's built. He doesn't trust the players to execute it properly. So that's a concern as well, yeah. You know, this is it. It's just, I don't think there's any doubts that Karanka can put a team together that, and in theory, you know, we're talking about a Birmingham team that's just been under Gary Monk and Pep Clotet, who both play very, very similar style of football, you know, and very similar concepts. You know, it can be quite abstract, but you'd think there's a lot of players in there that are used to, you know, defending spaces rather than man marking and this kind of strategy. And, you know, there's a degree of continuity there between that bloodline of managers. So in theory, you'd like to think he could get on top of the job, but yeah, you're just not seeing that stamp of a Karanka team there until, you know, again, this weekend, it could be a pivotal weekend for Birmingham, like it has been for Rotherham.
And is there an air of stubbornness as well? Because I guess if you rigidly stick to the system, and most managers will fall into this bracket as well, if you've got a belief, if you know which direction you're going in and you really want it to work, you're probably going to stick with it. But I'm sort of coming from an angle here where we saw Lucas Jutkiewicz and Scott Hogan teaming up really well as a front two under Pep Clotet, and that really worked. Birmingham had defensive problems, of course, but so far Karanka has been largely against pairing those two up and has preferred to just go with a single striker. You know, there's been a couple of occasions where they have played, but it's been largely late in games. He's, you know, he will have known about that partnership. He would have seen last year's results, but he's not willing to follow what has gone before and really wants to go down his own route. That has frustrated fans, I think, at times. But does that come down to just being stubborn, or is it belief, or is it a mixture of both?
I think it's not in his nature to be adaptable and to be spontaneous and be able to, you know, to be so accommodating of things like that. I think the system comes first, and then everybody fits into the system. And when everybody follows the system to the letter, it's virtually impenetrable. So it's virtually impenetrable. So, you know, he's basically, this is his starting point. Is, you know, the system comes first, everything fits into it, and then you refine it, you tweak it until you fine tune it until it's perfect. You know, you think back to his time at Middlesbrough when there was the walkout. You know, you can forget the season they were promoted. It all looked like it was going to, you know, he can't. I guess it's born out of frustration. Again, potentially over communication of not being able to necessarily meet people on the level that he wants to meet them in articulating himself and explaining himself. But I think he gets really frustrated when he's not understood. Yet his ideas are way above the level that he can actually communicate. And, you know, this infamously led to him blowing his top that season at Middlesbrough. And, you know, you do worry, you know, that it's not in his nature to be that adaptable to accommodate two players. And that those two players might be working in tandem, might be the core strength of Birmingham, you know, the Birmingham squad. And that's the starting point for most people. Now, the natural reaction for anyone is to turn around when they see that type of behaviour and the word stubborn comes out. People have, you know, we think of Pep Guardiola. We've done a podcast on Pep Guardiola. The word stubborn came up then. But now we've seen a turnaround at Manchester City through Pep Guardiola's stubbornness. You know, he has tweaked, but he's very much about his system. And Manchester City had to go backwards in terms of an attacking sense to get the defensive side right before they've gone forwards. And, you know, it's with Karanka in charge, it has to be Karanka's way, or that, you know, it's just not going to work. There's not really the same level of compromise because he just, you know, you're not hiring the manager that you want to hire. If you're not letting him do the job the way he wants to do it, you're not getting what you paid for in the first place. So, you just kind of have to sort of knuckle down and go with it and wait for it to turn, or make your decision to move on.
Going back to what you were just saying there, Mike, when you were speaking about Pep, and obviously, the comparisons will be made naturally. Both are systems men, both where the system comes first. And, they've been able to sign players on very different levels, hence why one's managing the Championship and one's, at the top or towards the top of the Premier League. But is the lack of charisma that maybe Aitor Karanka has, is that holding him back? Because we think of Pep, we think of the system, we think of the top quality players, but he's got that wit, he's got that spark about him, hasn't he? Whereas you don't necessarily get that from Karanka. Is that what's holding him back?
I think that's, I think you struck upon something there, most definitely, in that, you see the bubbliness of Guardiola on the training field, and you just can't imagine Karanka being so enthusiastic for the game, for every little moment and every little, I think he's very similar in the sense that, it's about where players are on the field and body shape and how to defend certain situations or be in certain situations, once you've got the system in place, then he can start to work on players on an individual level within the system. This is when they talk about tweaking and fine-tuning a system. But you've got to get the basics and the foundations of the system right first. And if you can't get past that stage because, there's all these whispers in the background about a front two that you could be playing or doing it this way, doing it that way. I mean, the parallels with Pep Guardiola are there for all to see. How much Guardiola's been questioned in recent weeks about his selection of individual players and playing players out of position and things like this. But it's about getting the whole system right first. And then once you've decided, okay, this is the best system, then look to tweak the different positions. And Karanka's got to get to that stage where everybody's fully invested in the, okay, if we all do what Karanka tells us to do, we will get results, no question. Hand over the trust and just believe him that he will get you the results if you're all fully invested. And then you can start to move forward with the tweaking process. And, I think Birmingham, the owner talked when he came in, or the chairman talked when his appointment in the summer, as though, promotion this year was a possibility. I think now it's quite evident that, that's not going to happen this season, but I think was always going to be a two-stage process, possibly a three-stage process. I think Karanka just wanted to get through the door for the opportunity because he didn't know where his next opportunity might come at Championship level. So he's probably sort of not, he's not rubbish the idea that promotion's a possibility this year, but I don't think he necessarily would have believed that for 1 second himself. I think he is always going to be a two-stage process with him, and they're still struggling on stage one. That blueprint at Middlesbrough is that's the first indication of what a Karanka team looks like. There's been a couple of instances this season, but they've never been backed up with a series of clean sheets and a series of results. That's what needs to be different this time, because we're at a very delicate period in the season where if they don't string a 5-6 game period together off the back of a result like this, you can't see Karanka finishing out the season.
And finally, just want to ask on Aitor Karanka because, there's a couple of quotes that I really enjoyed. This is not, particularly relevant, but I really enjoyed that when, after suffering a heavy defeat, the reporter said, the players must be hurting. How are they in there? And he said, to see them. I'm not going to talk to them or look at them. Which I found very interesting. But also a quote about George Friend as well, who he's, of course, signed from Middlesbrough. Apparently George Friend was upset at losing to Middlesbrough last time out, and Aitor came out and said, I told him I'm not signing a player for just on the pitch, I'm signing a top man, which I thought was, first of all, a nice quote. I enjoyed it, put a smile on my face, but it also kind of made me think about him surrounding himself with those players who really do believe in him and really do invest themselves in the system. Of course, you've got George Friend there. Adam Clayton at Birmingham as well, who he's worked with previously. And there's a couple of players who've come in who will have known him from Spain as well. Do you feel as though he needs almost an 11 of players who are absolutely 100% behind him and potentially players who have done it all before with him and just know what to expect from Aitor Karanka? Is it a case of the players that were already there, that were signed by Monk and Clotet and maybe even a few managers back, they just don't get it?
Possibly. I think it was quite revealing that, his first steps were for familiar, Spanish-speaking players, but also players that were familiar with this system from previous jobs. Because there is it is a process that needs to take place. The culture needs to change. And, in Clayton and Friend, you did think that, they are two players that would walk straight into that Birmingham dressing room and command respect, because they'll have been in head-to-head battles before, at championship level with a lot of the senior pros at Birmingham. In any case, you'd like to think that that respect would be mutual as soon as he walks into the dressing room. So they were key signings. As far as it goes for Karanka, I think there will be a reliance on those players to try and get the message across, because, again, it possibly comes back to the communication. But I don't think necessarily, we talk about Paul Warne in the first section and authenticity and that genuine. I think Karanka can come across as quite standoffish and not really know. He's a bit awkward when it comes to, the cajoling and the one-to-one connection with players. He does seem to come across as quite awkward. There is a side to him that is, I'm sure there's another side to him behind the scenes that we don't see, that people do get to see that side of him. And, otherwise players like George Friend and Adam, Clayton wouldn't come and play for him again. They've obviously connected on some level. But you feel like it's a dressing room that has to find its own way in terms of the culture and needs to buy in by being results. Are this, they're the perfect solution for a scenario like this. It's only through results sometimes that players then begin to think, hang on, this manager really might be onto something, because the way we played today, we did feel like, we weren't going to be penetrated, that we were really, the system was taking care of my, I felt like if I made a mistake within the game, the system would take care of it, because there's all these contingencies in place of the way he sets us up. And once players begin to see those things, but you kind of only see them things through results, because you lose a game, you look for what went wrong in a game. So, it goes hand in hand with the results. When players go away and reflect, they reflect on what went right in a game. And then eventually we'll begin to see that there's something in the system that's helping them as players and helping them to get these results. So it kind of goes hand in hand, but Karanka's not in the way that Pep Guardiola potentially, really bigs up players and really, his enthusiasm on the training ground and his development skills, and players thinking that, they're in the most capable hands possible to further their careers. I don't feel like that connection's necessarily going to be there with Karanka and his players.
Excellent stuff. Thank you as ever, Mike. We've looked today at Paul Warne and Aitor Karanka. And before we depart, we're going to do a bit of any other business. Now, if you're not a fan of the second tier, you might not be too chuffed to know that we're sticking in the Championship yet again for this. But we are covering a man who has already been a subject of one of our podcasts, and that is Neil Harris. At the time, he had said, well, I think I might be in trouble here. His side picked up 4 victories in a row off the back of that, but they've now slipped back into bad habits, I guess you could say, losing to Norwich this weekend at home by 2-1. And Mike, you think Neil Harris might be in trouble given what he's come out and said?
Yeah, it's crunch time part 2. He got himself into that situation where he said, I'm fighting for my life. He's not turned around and said, I'm fighting for my life this time, but the writing's on the wall just the same. He is basically, he's in a very delicate position and has responded to a 2-1 defeat at home to Norwich. Fortunately for him, top of the table, Norwich, not necessarily, it's Norwich weren't going into the game in ideal conditions. They had a few COVID issues to deal with and stuff like that. But they've gone and blown Cardiff away early doors, or they scored 2 early goals. And then Cardiff have fought back with 10 men in the second half and kind of just given a bit of recency bias in allowing Harris to really make a play on that second half performance, and how proud he was of his players to go toe-to-toe with by far the best team in the division and all the framing that he brings in. But it's clear, he can't afford to damage confidence. The next 3 or 4 matches are going to be absolutely crucial for him, because 15th or 16th in the table, wherever they are now, they're back to where they were a month ago. And since then, of course, I've had the 2-0 defeat at home to Swansea, which was very, very humbling for them. And, he needs big reaction in the next few games.
He does indeed. You mentioned it as well on our podcast on Neil Harris. The sides do tend to get going in the second half of the season, but at the moment, as things stand into 2021, his side really are treading water and back in mid-table, as you say. So we'll keep an eye on Neil Harris over the coming weeks. Mike, as ever, thank you very much for your company.
Yeah, pleasure, Jack.
And we'll do it all again in 7 days' time. Don't forget to check out the Foxpunter Facebook page. We're on Twitter @Foxpunter. And of course, we're on YouTube as well. You can listen back to any of our previous 11 podcasts. And we'll have 2 more managers in focus next week.